Welcome. It's just gone 7 p.m. Tuesday, the 3rd of December, and you are watching episode 154 of Regional Wrap. Regional Wrap providing insight on the issues affecting regional Australia and giving a voice to regional residents. My name is Bill Bates, and joining me on this episode, All I Want for Christmas is a Glock, is my guest, Daniel Hannagan, owner-operator of Lock and Load Gun Shop Cairns. Dan was born in Cairns, and his family's ties in the region predates Federation. He started his own martial arts academy at the age of 18 and has been actively involved in coaching and studying health and fitness. His experience in martial arts and personal training for elite businessmen and athletes at exclusive gyms around the world has provided Dan with a pathway to leadership and business training, delivering business efficiency, productivity, and strategy, together with work-life balance for clients in this cornerstone of his coaching ethos. In 2010, Dan took over his family's landfill business and was shocked to see the extent that the recyclable materials were being buried. With 5 years perseverance in the business, it was effectively recycling, reclaiming steel, aluminium, copper, as well as reducing reinforced concrete to its components of rebar, aggregate, and sand. Dan's passion to reduce landfill and increase the recycling rate saw him become an active member and vice president, and eventually a term as president of the Circular Economy Far North Queensland. He is well engaged with the community, committing to numerous volunteer and various charities. In 2022, he was a United Australia Party candidate for the federal division of Leichhardt. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you, Bill. It sounds quite impressive.
Well, before
I'll
we
start
get
here
on
in my
the
life to talk.
topic of the night in regards to gun ownership, just go through
Yes.
some of the early things. 18's pretty early to start your own academy. How come you got to a stage and it had the interest in martial arts and to get to such a qualificational level that you could actually run your own academy?
Um, Protection of others was the catalyst, mate. To be honest, my grandfather was a boxer, so I did a lot of boxing as a bare knuckle boxing champ back in the day. Um, and I kind of grew up in that era where everyone kind of had to learn to fight. I don't, I still want to instill that in my kids. My kids train jiu-jitsu, they do MMA and stuff like that. But I was kind of going through life, and there was situations at school where a group of kids came in, and a big fight broke out, and a bunch of people were involved. And I just felt like I was ill-equipped to efficiently and effectively deal with the situation. So I got really into martial arts, and I'm one of those people that, for the most part, I'm a all in or nothing kind of guy. Um, so I went from, you know, just kind of lazing around in the evenings to 6 days a week. I'd do martial arts. I'd train in the mornings, I'd train in the night, and became quite obsessive about it. I started running self-defense classes, and I was very, very lucky because the head of our martial arts, his name's Alan Stewart, Sifu Alan Stewart, um, extremely smart guy, very, very intuitive, very philosophical, and he took me under his wing and mentored me, which is another big passion of mine. I really feel like we lose a lot of mentoring, and in our culture, but he took me under his wing, and then it kind of condensed a lot of time. I was able to condense a hell of a lot of training into a fairly short period, and get to a level of skill and deliverability. That's another thing, is you need to be able to take all that knowledge, because some people are extremely good fighters, but they're not actually very knowledgeable with the skill set, or how to teach the skill set. And that seemed to be a good fit for me. And I was very passionate about helping people develop self-confidence and feeling more certain in their abilities and in getting about their day, right? So self-defense was a big thing. And then martial arts has always been there for me. I love it. It's a something that if anyone is listening who does martial arts, once it's in your bones, you just keep doing it. And it frustrates me anytime I have an injury and I can't train, because I love it. But essentially, mate, it was good mentoring. Good mentoring is what shortened the whole journey for me.
I think one of the most important things about martial arts is a lot of people don't understand. It is gives you a lot of self-discipline. I mean, just because you can do something physically to someone else doesn't mean you go and do it. You have a mindset how to avoid the problem more than anything else. That's the same. That I mean, I did it for a while, but I was one of those sort of fad things. You can do it for a year or so, but other things come along. But that's what I found. The self discipline sort of improves, and your self confidence. So you don't have to show that
Don't have to
you know
engage.
martial
You can put
arts.
the bravado aside.
Yeah. So I think that's probably one of the big things that's missing from society is having a bit of self-discipline and having a bit of self-confidence as well, because I
Yeah.
think that takes people a lot further in life, that initial self-confidence, um, than anything else. A bit of knowledge is good, but self-confidence is a real key to actually help you reach your potential. And I suppose that's what you're talking about with mentoring. Um, I find today that you would think with all the aids we've got to save us time, we haven't got a generation of people who have time to help others or mentor others. So
Yeah. Wow.
is it being left to professionals now too much, and there's not enough general people out there who mentor people in general, even in their workplace?
Yeah, mate, I've spent a bit of time pondering this and doing some deep thinking, and there's a few things. One, culturally, um, people aren't raised like they were where they're relying on a community. So people become very insular, like it's just family, 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 and they're not the village situation. And, I just got back from Han River, and if you're in the remote regions of anywhere, people have to rely on each other, all right? Wet season comes, you get flooded in, you run out of food, you're relying on your neighbor. Truck breaks down, you're stuck in the middle of nowhere, you're relying on the goodwill of other people. And that community aspect that country folk just live with and know is something that city people don't necessarily develop because when they need something, they call, the car breaks down, they call RACQ. They're hungry, they call Uber Eats or DoorDash or one of those things. They got an issue with a neighbor, they call the body corporate or they call the police. They're not out there engaging and having discussions. So I think culturally and the way that we raise kids has shifted a lot. Also, the integration with the family. A lot of people don't spend time with their grandparents or their parents, and so they're not getting that follow-on knowledge. And it's something that it's very frustrating, and I'd say it angers me, but I'm nearly at that point where I feel like there's a hell of a lot of wisdom and knowledge that's out there in the older generations that isn't getting passed down, and we historically repeat the same mistakes if we don't learn. And there's a lot of living knowledge out there about how things were and ways to do things that it's just slipping by. And I'll give you a real life example. At Lock and Load, which is formerly CRM for anyone listening, it was around for a long time. And PK is the gunsmith there, and he's lives and breathes guns. That man is, I call him the Oracle. He knows more about guns than I know about anything. He is absolute wizard, and he can grab a gun, feel it, look at it, tell you what's going on, look at one little screw and know exactly what the story of that screw, where it goes, and what gun or what model, yada yada. And he has so much knowledge, but the trade of gunsmithing is slowly dying, and there's not going to be more people out there doing that. So we've had this massive evolution where guns became a normal part of society. People needed them for self-preservation, to hunt, to protect. There was been guns have been around a long time before people started doing mass shootings and all this kind of stuff. And and people just grew up different culturally, but the skill sets that you got in a trade. And the thing I always reflect back on is people used to say, I signed off on a job, which literally meant the craftsman or the tradesman would put their name on the job because they were proud of what they did. And if anything was to go wrong with it, they said, hey, Tom, John, whatever, your work's come back again and again. You need to fix these things. And they would work through it and have a good mentorship kind of program that's existed in life because that's how knowledge got passed on. And all those things that made society strong, and for the younger people to look up and say, okay, I'm going to respect what this person does. I might do it differently once I've learnt the skills, but I'm going to take that knowledge and be appreciative and respectful of it and go through that process. So, I really do feel we lack a lot of that in society, and it's saddening me to a point. I'm starting to get pretty angry about it because it's it's just it's dumb. It's dumb not to to pass that knowledge on.
Well, one of the things that sort of gets up my nose a little bit is I do, and I did it in down in Victoria too. Spent a bit of time going to different country towns and going to different historical museums. And up here, you go to places like Miller and then over to even the smaller towns. There's a little historical society, and you can see a wealth of history there. But the thing that really worries me is the people who are now reaching that age around about the 80s, the
Yeah.
history that they have, and they probably still got access to in documents, photographs, and stuff. We don't have that real drive to save that, and our historical societies are not supported enough to make sure that information is retained. And then that with even schools and that are not supporting those places by sending kids there to have a look at some of our past, because I think you see photos. I mean, I just my instance in the Dandenong Ranges, there's a place called Monbulk, and they had a museum. And you see the timbers and that they were cutting down, and the houses they were building and that, and it was all done by hand.
Yeah.
Uh, and we're not recognising the efforts of those people, and basically uh, paying a bit of reverence to it, and we're just letting it die. And I think for as much as the government talks about indigenous culture and things like that, there should be just as much effort to ensure that our history in all these sort of historical societies is kept there, and improved, and have people have better access. And to keep them going, it wouldn't cost much. I mean, you've got all volunteers doing it. It would only be a matter of a few $1,000s each year into to make their life easier, that would preserve and better allow people to see it on a more regular basis.
Yeah. I think your viewers are probably inclined to believe that the government wastes a lot of money on things that don't produce any valuable outcomes, and this is an easy sell to me, and I'm sure it is to other people. So I agree with you, Bill. I think we should invest to preserve the stories. I know even in my family, my grandfather, he drove cattle from Darwin to Rockhampton on horseback. Took 6 months, and then the other half of the year he cut cane by hand. Now, my mother, when he was sick, he had a stroke and then developed leukemia. But while he was sick, she sat down with him and said, "All right, Dad, we need to get these stories down because people aren't going to do this stuff again. Like that generation's done. We need to capture the information." So my mum sat there and spent hours typing as he told stories to capture that information. And you know that that's the that's exactly the point I was trying to make. And it exists in every area of life where all these amazing stories and look, just the challenge that people went through. I was laughing about this on the weekend. We were um, up north and on a few different properties, and we were talking about what life would have been like before any infrastructure to be up there. Like it's still remote now, but most of the roads sealed. We've got diesel generators, there's air conditioning, all this kind of stuff, right? We can get pumps and pump water out of the creek. But back then, they were taking buckets out of the creek, and they were living in lean-tos and all this kind of stuff. And half the year up there would seemingly be inhabitable without some creature comforts. But people did it, and they worked hard, and they did incredible things and lived through so much adversity. And just in that, there's a great story to be told. But anyway, I could waffle on about this
Yeah,
stuff all night.
yeah. But I've also been fortunate to know Andrew Cummings and his father Bill Cummings, and also Bill's wife, Janet. But it's interesting talking to people who have, five generations in the area and the history that they can personally tell in relation to their great great grandfather and things like that. And it is
Yeah.
sort of awe-inspiring the things that they went through. And I suppose that's the sort of characters we need to capture that history and take note of it.
There's some amazing stories out there. Like I've got bullet train drivers. My great great grandmother was born on Thursday Island in the late 1800s. If anyone's been to the Torres Straits, it's a long way from anywhere. Like you are right out there. And imagine that in the 1800s for people who are traveling around the world. Like it's there's some great stories. But anyway,
Yeah.
like I said,
Anyway,
I could
coming
I
back.
could I could waffle on about this
Yeah,
all night.
yeah. Coming back to today, well, a little bit past the recycling side of things, and
Yep.
the can you give us a bit of an idea of? All right, we understand how you got to it, but what the recycling system is and the efforts up here to improve the lot of recycling.
Yeah. So I still work on waste projects. I have five partners in another company based out of Melbourne, and we actually have a project that looks like we've secured funding for. So I'll probably have to come back on and talk about that whole project another time, Bill, because it's quite incredible. Essentially, if you go back to when I was a kid, at the would be the kind of the latest point it happened. I grew up in a demolition family, so when my grandfather would go out and knock a building down, they didn't waste things. So if you pulled up all the floorboards, someone would buy the floorboards, or the joists would go, or the roofing iron would go, the sinks would go. They'd pull out just about everything that they could out of a building, and they'd reuse it. So recycling didn't have to be a big thing because there wasn't a lot of things that were wasted. Now, as far as consumers at the shopping center, when I was a kid, plastic bags were around, of course, but I remember people would use paper bags and they would also have baskets and they would go to the grocer and they'd get all their fruit and they'd just weigh it, then go in a basket. This kind of stuff was just standard. Like, no one knew any different. But you fast forward to now, and I find this whole plastic bag thing at shopping centers to be like speaking out of both sides of your mouth. It's the biggest contradiction because you walk into the shopping center and every single damn thing in that shopping center is wrapped in plastic. Like the whole thing is plastic. And then they won't let you get a plastic bag, but you can buy bin liners for your plastic bin liners for your bin to put your rubbish in, but you can't, like we used to just use those. So, I find the hypocrisy of the waste industry uh, is one of the biggest frustrations of my life because the way the whole system's rigged is just a numbers thing, and it doesn't necessarily reflect whether or not we're doing a good job. The problem is that a lot of the products that even are deemed to be recyclable, when they're sent into regional areas, and Cairns is a regional area, we don't have the facilities to process them. So a lot of things that could have been recycled won't be recycled up here. The other thing, as an affluent country, our labour force is expensive, so all the labour work that would need to happen to properly recycle things, it doesn't happen, and we're just lazy. That's it. We're a very lazy country when it comes to things like that. If you go to Japan or Germany, as they're probably the two of the best examples. As a friend of my family says, when we're in Germany, their accent, I'm trying to do it, but we get a tea bag and the top comes off and that's paper and the string goes in the bin and the staple comes out and that goes in your metal bin. Then you tip out all your tea leaves and that's your compostables. And then that's it. You break it all up, right? And that's how they mentally look at things, and that's how they do things. Japanese are the same. You get your recycling bottle, the label goes in there, the lid goes in there, and the bottle goes in there. So culturally, it's very different because people are actively looking to make sure they do the right thing and separate stuff. Now, in saying that, years ago, China stopped accepting recyclables from Australia, and I remember the government having a big hoo-ha about it. And I was on ABC radio, and I think Landline rang me about it and whatnot. And I just got back from China looking at recycling equipment, and they gave Australia 7 years notice that they were going to stop accepting contaminated recyclable material. As they never said they would stop taking recyclables. They said stop contaminating it because if we take in 1 million tons a year of waste from other countries and 10% of that million tons is contamination, we've got 100,000 tons every year. And the number's actually way bigger than this. I'm just making up numbers for this conversation. That's 100,000 tons of other countries' waste that was coming into China every year that those countries should have been responsible for. And all they said was you need to reduce the amount of contamination in your recyclable products. But the thing is that it becomes such a politicized topic, and people don't focus on what the outcome we're looking for. They focus on whether one party's doing this or another party's doing that. And it drives me nuts because they get too busy having arguments over who should have done what rather than just saying, okay, let's just get this done. But again, as soon as politics gets involved in any great outcome, it can destroy it. Um, but the thing with recycling is it will come down to consumers. Okay. There's there's only so much rubbish we can pour into our rivers and our ocean and the air and the land before it hits critical mass and everything goes up, right? Right. I'm not talking about climate change. I'm talking about pollution. And we pollute a hell of a lot. And if you look at all the rubbish coming down from Indonesia, any of your viewers or listeners that are up in the north of Australia, there's rubbish flowing into the beaches all the time. Even up in the Cape, they're getting rubbish through onto the beaches. That's not from Australia, right? And the ocean's getting so full of rubbish that it's just circulating the place. And that's just the stuff that floats. So to me, you know, the biggest issue we have right now environmentally is cleaning up all the crap that's actually entering our waterways, polluting our drinking water, polluting the air. If you go into Asia, particularly, the air over there is insanely polluted. And I think the last study I read said that people that live in major polluted cities, like in China or Indonesia, on average, their lifespan is reduced by about 10 years versus people in regional areas. That's ridiculous. So again, this is another subject I'm very passionate
Yeah,
about,
yeah.
Bill. You're hitting on my buttons
Well,
tonight, and I could.
we might do another show on that, but I think we've got a big thing to get over in Australia. I mean, we are there's so many litter bugs. I mean, I cannot believe
It's
at this day
disgusting.
and age people still stop, go to a parking lot and still have a McDonald's and that, and just drop the stuff out on the tarmac, uh,
Yep.
and then they go. I mean, you can see the mentality at the football and things like that. Just because someone else is go to clean it up after, like the council or whatever, or the venue workers, doesn't mean you got the right to just bomb the whole place. You look at Fogarty Park and places like that after an event. It's just completely covered with litter. People need to get into the mindset, don't litter in the first place, and it won't be half as bad to clean up. So, it's not a big deal, taking care of your own litter and putting in a bag and disposing of it properly. Even if you have to take it home and put it in your own bin, it's not that big of a chore.
No, it's a good point to bring up. Is this lack of self responsibility for the outcomes in our society? Um, Litter's a great example. People who throw things out the window or leave them at a park and think someone else is going to clean up. There's so many things within our society that our government said, "Oh, we're just going to look after this," and then people don't. Like don't expect the government to look after your health. Don't expect the government to look after your retirement. Don't expect the government to clean up the environment. Like we have to do
To
this
do
stuff.
it.
And this if you go for a walk with my family and we come across rubbish, everyone starts picking it up. Because if I'm up at Stony Creek up the road and I find rubbish, I'm not leaving it there. This is absolutely gorgeous part of the world, and it drives me nuts. But
And
yeah,
it makes you wonder what the person's mentality is who left it there in the first place, and think,
yeah, I've been
well,
in plenty
I
of
wouldn't
Barneys
mind
over
giving
rough.
them a kick in the bum.
Yeah, I've nearly gotten a few fisties over it. But luckily the calmness of martial arts kicks in and I let it go.
Okay, we'll move on to the topic of the night, and that's about
Yep.
gun license and that. I'll share this screen because this is what brought it up, and the reason I contacted you.
Yes.
So you can see that on the screen.
Yep. Got it.
So that was the story in the Courier Mail. Um, and it basically says there's been an increase in firearms licenses and quantities of firearms since the pandemic, which is now the start of the pandemic is nearly 5 years old, and it compared that the increase was over that period has been 30%, whereas in the previous 5 years before that, it was only up 12%. So it just got me to thinking, well, what why have we sort of embraced this a little bit more? Because my general perception from the media and politicians and stuff, that they don't want you to have a firearm anyway. But so I thought I'd have a talk to you and just discuss what's involved in getting a firearms license.
Yep. Um, so it's a good point. It's
Have you
interesting.
noticed? I don't know how long you've been at the shop, but have you noticed a growth in the number of firearms and license applications over the last few years?
Look, it's hard to. I've owned that shop 2 years, but I do talk to people in the industry about this, and some people say the glory days were way gone, like that long time ago. But then in the mid, um, like 2010, 2015, there's another surge. But it does depend on where you are, and there's a lot of contributing factors. So, there's people watch movies and see guns in movies and get excited and want to shoot those guns. And, like tactical platforms are a big thing now. Um, there's a lot of things culturally that influence people and get them excited about shooting. Look, one of the things I love about shooting is it doesn't matter if you're 80 or 11 or a male or a female or 100 kilos or 50 kilos. It doesn't matter. Like if you can hold the gun steady and you acquire a target and shoot, then, in fact, when we have a gallery, which means people in the public can come in and do a shooting experience and don't require to have a license at all. No firearms experience. We've got world-class instructors. Every one of the staff has competed at like a national level or international level. Like they're very, very, very good shooters. And I'm not. I'm not that good. So they do that stuff and they're fantastic at it. But you can come in off the street and it's 100% safe. The guns are actually tethered so you can't shoot yourself and you have a shooting experience, right? And I can tell you, 80% of the women who come in with a male partner, they outshoot them completely. They're calm, they listen to the instructions, they do what they're supposed to do, and the guys have this preconceived idea that they can shoot, and the girls are more often outshoot them. So it's a really even playing field. I love that about shooting. But in terms of the market and what drives it. I read an interesting thing about American gun sales and ammunition sales, and it goes higher when Democrats are in party in power. And what they were saying is that if there's a government in power that will enforce tighter restrictions on people's freedoms and ability to obtain a firearm or protect themselves from these kind of things, which is American. You're not allowed to do that in Australia. You can't protect your family in your house with your gun. Um, but when there's a constraint on people and there's uncertainty, they'll buy more bullets and more guns. So I believe part of it was that people were concerned about government, concerned about control, all those things. Even though you can't use firearms for protection, that would sit in the back of people's heads. But a big thing was free time, right? So when COVID and the pandemic kind of set in, a lot of people started getting into sports that they might have done when they were younger or always been interested in, and they looked at things differently. So there's a lot of things that kind of came about from that. That was just a general reaction to saying, well, what the hell am I doing with my time and my life? What do I want to do? And then just going down that path. For the
And it's a
most
lot
part,
easier than running around the block and exerting yourself.
yeah, shooting. Yeah, shooting's a lot of fun. Like people who haven't shot and they give it a go, they get a smile on their face like you wouldn't believe. It's actually one of the most fulfilling parts of owning the shop is seeing people go on the shooting range and fire a 44 Magnum pistol and they just light up like they're like, holy smokes. Whenever I've got friends come to town, I'll take them in for a shoot and, they get, use the pump, but they get blown away. It's a lot of fun. So my sons, I got three sons, and my eldest is 13, and for his birthday, always wants to come in and shoot guns, and so we do that. He loves it. It is safe. It's definitely safer than driving a car, texting on a mobile phone. Um, but in terms of the true influences, Bill, I think there's a culmination of things. Um, but in terms of the government, it's a tough one because if we look at what's going on in Western Australia, and if any of your viewers are over there, I've been on the phone to a few people over there recently, and they're about to implement some really, really strong gun legislation and gun ownership, which will confine people to just either shooting at the range or they have to get a sign off by a property, and they've limited how many people can be signed off by a particular property. So their gun ownership is going to have to collapse, which means an entire industry is going to collapse, and it's not right. It's not fair. That forget if he was the police commissioner and they'd got, say, 20,000 guns off owners. And he's like, oh, that's 20,000 reasons you're safer in your house. And I thought, well, what a ridiculous statement. You
Those
can't
people were
tell
never
me.
afraid anyway.
No one's breaking into houses with guns in Australia. And if
Not
someone
not not
goes,
not who own a gun license anyway.
well, no, I don't know about that, but like if you look at statistics of people who get shot with guns in Australia, if it's not drug related and gang related and money related, like in that field, it's almost non-existent. It's almost non-existent. Um, if people want to do dumb stuff and kill people, like we had that incident in Cairns, maybe 10 years ago, where that lady was high on ice and she went around and slaughtered 7 or 8 kids in their beds. You don't need a gun. Like if she had had a gun, she would have got one or two shots off, and everyone would have come, running to find out what the hell's going on. Like everyone would have woken up. But anyway, I, the nonsensical stuff of gun laws is ridiculous. Like in New South Wales, they won't let you own a certain gun because of the way it looks, not how it performs, not how fast you can reload it, how it looks. Like it is this legislation across this country is so ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense at all. But we just kind of shrug our shoulders and go, well, that's where it's at. But the problem is, like a lot of things in the political world, the decisions are made by people based on emotion and fear and uncertainty and public perception based on the same things versus rationale.
Yeah.
And if you talk to any police officers, they're going to tell you that people who own guns are some of the most law-abiding people around. Okay, you're always going to have your cowboys in there, but they got the most to lose, right? You don't want to get a violation and lose all your guns because you might have 10 or 20 or $30,000 worth of guns. You don't want them taken off you. And if it's part of your hobby or your lifestyle, you don't want to lose that either. So people tend to behave pretty well when they've got gun licenses and got guns. Um, and whoever's coming up with these laws isn't really consulting the public and the shooters too much because they come up with some pretty stupid things. You know what I mean? And they're slowly putting the squeeze on because one of the things in getting a firearms license is you need to have a genuine reason. Okay. And I don't, so, so the audience knows I have no drama with the need for people to have a license. I truly believe there should be a screening process because while I think that the majority of people are good people in society, the reality is, and the data shows, there's some people out there that just aren't good people. And if they have a track record of violence, drug abuse, um, you know, certain behavioral traits, they probably shouldn't have access to guns because maybe you're just asking for trouble. So I don't have a drama with the screening process to make sure you're a fit and proper person. In saying that, it's at the discretion of someone sitting in office that doesn't really know you. And, you could make a case that you did stuff when you were younger and you've grown up and matured and all that kind of stuff, and there's appeals process and whatnot. Um, but there's also the case where I know people, customers of a shop who had their firearms license and the guns taken off them because they attended protests during COVID. And I'm not on board with that. I think if you attend a protest, I don't really give a shit what the protest is. I think, you should have the right to attend a protest as long as you're not hurting anyone else in the process of protesting, then you're all good. And he didn't. Well, actually, none of them did. So it's where the police kind of get a bit like get their knickers in a knot and decide they're just going to disqualify someone and say they're not fit and proper. Every single one of these people in the appeals court got their license back and it was good, but it never feels good for people to be told they're not a good person, right? So what what the way legislation works in Queensland, because it is different for every state, as I said, you need to have a genuine reason to hold a firearms license. Now, there's two main categories. One is you have a large property, and the other one is you're part of a shooting membership organisation, federation, like Sporting Shooters Association of Australia or Shooters Union of Queensland. So both great organisations, both strong advocates for shooters. Being part of those organisations means you have a genuine reason to be a shooter. So that's one aspect of it. So either land or SSAA Shooters Union. The other thing is you need to do a safety course. Okay, just like if you're going to go do a first aid course, something like that, where you're going to get a level of proficiency. Before you get a gun, you should understand what a gun is, how a gun works, what ends the dangerous end, where the bullets go, what can happen if you shoot a bullet. Basic information. You do a full day. Phil Lawrence runs the courses for Cairns firearms training. He runs it in our building, actually. So works upstairs in the classroom, comes down, you see all the students go through, and they all actually have to physically shoot a firearm. So they do the theory in the classroom and physically go through the process of loading a firearm, shooting a firearm, doing the drills of what happens if it doesn't fire, because you don't want to go bang and then start opening the chamber and it detonates. So there's all these safety aspects towards, safe handling of the firearm. So you do all that, right? So you've done your safety course, and it's about $160. Takes 8 a.m. to about 1:30 in the afternoon. So now you've done your safety course and you've got a genuine reason, which is your property in SSAA. You take those two things and you submit an application to weapons licensing to get a firearms license. You can do that all online. What they'll do is they'll send you an email back, and it'll basically have a barcode that you take into a post office. They scan, they'll take a photo of you. You verify your identity with your passport, driver's license, all that kind of stuff, the normal stuff we have to do. And then somewhere between 2 and 3 months later in the post, you receive a nice bit of plastic that says, you have a Queensland weapons license. So weapons is a whole bunch of things. But for firearms, it's AB is your basic ones. And then C and D is when you get into pump action semi-automatic, the pump action shotguns, which is a bit of a funny thing because that's old, dumb movie legislation as well. But semi-automatic, like centerfire rifles, big ones, as your Cat Ds, and then Cat H is handguns. But Cat C and D, your reason and rationale goes on and on. It basically needs to be for employment or feral pest management that require it, like pigs and a big piece of land. They're not easy to get, and you do need a good reason to have them. But A and Bs, or your sports shooting, 22s, 17 HMRs, all the way through to 308, 300 Win Mag, all that kind of stuff, you can all get on a AB license, your shotguns, straight pulls, button release guns, all that kind of stuff. So Cat H is a little different. So that's all you'd have to do to get a Cat AB for your long arms. You also need, as part of that, to have a safe. So don't go doing all that and then don't organise a safe, because as a firearms license holder, you have to have a place that's legally what's the word?
Compliant.
Approved, like an approved storage facility, like a safe, right? So if you read the legislation, there's some funny wording around it, like you can actually have a timber box that's locked, but essentially the gun needs to be in the safe and it needs to be temporary and operable, which means you can have a trigger lock or take the bolt out or put a cable through it, those kind of things. But you can't have magazines loaded. You can't basically have the gun ready to go if you get pissed off with something and open the safe and start shooting. Okay, so there has to be a time delay for that. Same thing when you're driving a vehicle and you have guns in it. If you're in a car with your family and you have a license and no one in your family does, and you pull up at the service station and you need to fill the car up, they all have to get out of the car. You lock the car, go and pay for the fuel. Everyone gets back in the car and drive off. You can't leave the guns with anyone who's unlicensed without supervision. That's just how it works. Um, and you need to be really careful when you're carrying guns around in a car that you're not just kind of meandering around the place. You need to have some form of intention where you're going. Now, when you're on a private property and you're hunting, you can have the magazine in, bullets in the magazine, good to go because you're actually out there to hunt or target shoot or whatever. When you go to ranges, and this is a bit of a tip for anyone getting into shooting, best advice when you get to the range, go and introduce yourself, go and chat to people, don't get your guns out of the car, familiarize yourself and let them get familiar with you. We get a lot of feedback in the shop about people at ranges being a bit short or a bit rude. What it is, and obviously there can be that element. Most people are extremely friendly, but when you turn up with a bunch of guns and you don't know how to handle it, you don't know where to put the guns, and you're acting a little bit uncertain and erratic, and there's guns around, people don't like that feeling.
Mm.
So make sure you go and introduce yourself and have a conversation. Find out who the RO is, the range officer. Ask them what the etiquette is. Ask them what the processes are, and then do it. Right? Everyone wants to make sure they go home and see their family. And I'm not saying that people are going to turn up and start shooting people, but a gun that's left loaded that falls over could discharge and shoot someone. Or people do funny things, Bill, like they're holding a gun and they'll turn around
Talking.
to talk to you. They don't want to be rude, so they talk to you with a gun or they got a gun. And how does this? And you think you wouldn't do it, but people do it all the time. And you hear stories of people like, oh, well, bullets jammed in the barrel, and they're looking down the barrel. It seems dumb, but that's why a lot of this stuff's in place, right? Because there's this idiot factor in all humans where they just go, oh, duh, at a bit of a moment. Um, so, yeah, if you're going to go to the range and shoot, go and introduce yourself to the RO, develop some level of rapport with them first so they know you're a good guy, they're a good guy, a girl, whatever. And then you get to the shooting. But just spend some time being observant first, understand the lay of the land, and then get into it. Now, basically with your AB, which is your rifles, shotguns, all that kind of stuff, it's pretty straightforward, right? You pay your annual membership and you can do, 1, 3, 5, 10 years with weapons licensing, and you pay your double SAA or shooters union, or you have it associated with the land for a genuine reason. You just make sure you pay that and you're good. All right. That's it. That's all you have to do. Then you can have rifles and shotguns and all that kind of stuff, and you're sweet. Okay. Where it gets a little bit more complicated is if you want to own a handgun. So handguns require you to do a safety course as well. You could do your AB, your basic, your long arms, and your H at the same time. But your H license requires you to be a financial active member of a firearms club, of a pistol club. So you don't have to shoot regularly if you don't own a gun, but as soon as you own a handgun, you have to shoot it. That first caliber you have to do 6 times every year in a competitive shoot. Okay. So that's a time commitment. And really, at the end of the day, if you want to own a handgun, then you need to be active with it because, again, under Australian legislation, you cannot own a firearm for personal protection. It's only for sporting use. Okay. So you need to be actually doing the sport, not just owning the guns. And that it just makes sense, that part of it. So you do the safety course. Um, Before you get a H class license for your handgun, you need to have done 6 months probational period in a pistol club and complete what's called a Form 33 shoot. You need to do at least 3 of them, which is when someone supervises you, who's part of the club, and they sign off on your participation that you've attended a minimum of 3 shoots in that 6 months. Then they're going to supply you with a letter of attendance, basically a statement that says that, yes, you're a member of the club, you're a financial member, and you participated in a minimum amount of shoots. And you're going to email that off with your attendance card and your double SAA, and you're good. All right. You'll put your application and you'll come back and then you'll have a H class license and then you can
So
start buying
when you're doing that, you be borrowing or using the gun from the range
clubs.
or a club or something else. So
Yep.
don't actually have your own gun or anything. You're
No.
doing this. So it's really what it's doing is uh, getting the person who wants to have the license or have access to the weapon and own the weapon, gets them into a routine at a minimum of participation. And this is, I've had this discussion with actually Graham Park from the president of the Shooters Union.
Yeah,
and
great.
they're a little bit want some of the things curbed down a bit because I think for each sort of category or caliber of handgun, you have to have individual shoots. You can't go and shoot one and that counts as a thing. If you've got another one of a different caliber, well, you got to do the same with that caliber. So it's very the time is ramping up the amount of time. And his situation, well, his argument was that you do it doesn't matter which caliber you're doing it with, but long as you do each caliber uh, alternately or something like that, it should be fair enough. And he thinks it's really a big gain for the operators of the ranges rather than really looking after the people who want to own the gun. And so he sort of viewed it as being a little bit excessive in that way. Um,
Particularly in Brisbane, where the fees are very expensive to use a a pistol club, yeah, to be a member. So up here, there's some clubs that are $100 a year. We're $395 a year, but you don't rely on a volunteer to RO at our facility. We have a paid staff member ROing it. They're not doing anything but watching people. So there's a big difference there. We're very conscious of people's safety, and we ensure that everyone's professionally looked after. Not there's no volunteers in our range at all. So the cost is a lot more, and it's indoor and it's private, right? There's no public aren't just walking in and out. And we limit the numbers of there, so there's not like 20 people jammed in banging guns off at one time. But at some of the other clubs, they have a lot more space. Then they have a lot more shooters, and they do a different type of shooting. So there's that as well too, Bill, because there's stagnant shooting, we're just standing in line, just going bang bang, and there's a class of shooting called IPSC where you actually walk through or run through different targets. They use a whole bunch of guns, but pistols is part of that, and that's a lot of fun. Um, but Graham's right. Um, like if you shoot a 22, a 9 mil, a 38, and they're all semi-automatic guns, it's the same safety protocol for all of them. It's just different different bullets, basically, with different amount of recoil and you know different costs to run the damn things. But really, safe handling of a firearm, safe handling of a firearm. Now there is differences between revolvers and semi-automatic pistols, but essentially clear the gun before you get off the line. Make sure you're pointing it down the range, nowhere else. Don't look down the barrel. Simple stuff like this. And so, yeah, Graham is right. I'm not don't argue that point at all. Um, but a lot of the clubs are volunteers, so they don't really need more people to turn up um, to pay their bills. It doesn't work like that. Most of those clubs run on the rifle range stuff like anyway. But um, I think a point that I'd like to make to your listeners is that shooting's shooting's not attracting enough younger people. The average age is older than me. There's a lot of people, in their 50s, 60s, 70s, even 80s and 90s. You see them come in that shoot, and there is young people getting into shooting, but not enough. And it's a fun sport. It's an awesome sport in terms of uh, mentally against yourself because you can overthink things, and as soon as you get in your head, you're all over the place, and you got to stay calm, you got to stay relaxed, you got to stay focused, you got to read the conditions. There's a lot of little fun things to it, and it's you against your own thoughts sometimes. So there's a lot of great things about shooting, but the problem is that if we don't have shooters, it dies. And the more the government kind of constricts on us, like they're doing in Western Australia, the more we have to push back because ultimately it will be the end of it. Now, if, and again, I'll make this very clear, you're not allowed to protect yourself with firearms in Australia. Like you're not allowed. They're arguing it. The counterparty's got the castle law that they're trying to push through, which I don't know if you spoke about that on this program, Bill, but that they're using any form of weapon greater at whatever level you feel necessary versus this whole thing of equal force. This equal force argument I don't agree with because um, if my wife is left with the kids and a guy comes in with a knife and she's only allowed to use a knife, that's dumb. If there's a pistol there and it's my wife getting raped or bashed or worse, or something happened to my kids, and she's got a gun and the guy's got a knife, I'll deal with the legal consequences after, but I don't want that happening to my family. And I think every person thinks like that, right? If you don't, I don't understand you, but I will do anything to protect my wife and kids. I'll deal with the legal repercussions later, but no one's hurting my family. And I'm very clear on that. So while I understand that we're legally not allowed to do that in Australia, if our government was to flip and go crazy or we get invaded, people need to protect themselves. They need to be able to fight for their own freedoms and whatever they want to stand for collectively. And if they slowly crush down the whole industry so no one has a gun, then what?
Well, it's interesting. A lot of people don't understand the American Second Amendment. It wasn't an original constitution; it was an amendment, and it was basically put there because of the tyranny of governments, and because
Yeah,
they had gone through a revolution where the British had decided they were going to tax you to death or whatever, and put forces, or conditions on the populace of the American colonies and they needed to resist. Now, fortunately, in those days, it was quite common to have firearms because of the nature of
off.
the new world. So it
Yeah,
was accepted. So people were armed, but obviously the forefathers there and the people who came along later recognised that as time goes by, they still needed to ensure that the populace could deal with a tyrannical government, and they also realised their own government could become that, and so that people had the right to resist. But that's the reason the Second Amendment's there. Um,
yeah.
and the other thing is we get so much bad publicity out of the United States with what's happens there with some of the mass shootings and that sort
Yeah.
of spills over to our conversation about firearms. And like you say, that's the bureaucrats making up laws on basis, well, we don't want this to happen or whatever. And so they start modifying, coming up with new regulations and for the legislation. But it's the same old problem. It doesn't matter whether it's firearms or land management. It's the people sitting up in wherever the capital cities are, up in some big high rise in their
Yep.
concrete ivory tower. They're thinking up their rules and their consultation process. And like I say, it doesn't matter if it's an environmental thing or
No,
firearms.
it doesn't. It's
It,
the
it
same
has.
thing.
They're not even interested in the discussion. They're only interested in the outcome, and that's the biggest problem.
Yeah, you're right, Bill. It's exactly the same scenario, and people get caught up in the media spin, and they get caught up in headlines and not reality. Um, and again, like I'll make this very clear, I do believe in regulating guns. I do believe in making sure that you're fit and proper, just like you need a car license. And if you do the wrong thing and you get caught drink driving and speeding, there's repercussions, right? That's an agreement of society. I don't have a drama with that. And I feel like if we get too far down the libertarian side of things, it can become anarchy. We have to have rules and structure. When everything falls down in life, people get together and do what they did in the States where they formed the Constitution. They said, hey, this isn't working. We can't have, dictatorship and tyrannical government and communism and these kind of things, but we can't just be free and do whatever we want. We need to find a set of rules and guidelines and principles to live by, and that's just going to be what we're going to do, and let's do it. So they did it, and they're like, hang on, there's a few things here that aren't working. Let's make some amendments to them, just as you said, and that was the second one. So, you know, humans aren't perfect, and as soon as you put people in a role of power, there's levels of corruption that will happen to humans, right? And it's not whether they will be or won't, it's just how it's perceived and what they do. So there's always those kind of dramas, and at the end of the day, we've got to kind of figure out democratically what works for us because we live in a democratic country. The problem I see is that the media portrays things in a light that isn't true and doesn't reflect any form of reality. And I know that truth and reality are, they're aligned. Um, and I'll give you a great example. Like in the United States, yep, they're huge in gun crime. Like I think they're first or second in the world, right, for gun crime per capita. Now, the cities that are the hardest on guns, where it's the hardest to own a gun, the hardest to keep a gun, all those kind of things, are democratic cities. And those top five cities account for nearly all the gun crime in the whole country. And the higher the level of gun control and the more blue the place is, the higher the chance there's going to be gun crime, gun violence, gang violence, mass shootings, all those kind of things. Because it comes back to how we started this conversation, Bill, about making sure that people live in a good culture, that they do good things, that it's not about them, that's about what we do together and how we look after each other. And they're like, oh, it's the guns that are the problem, it's the drugs that are the problem. It's not the damn guns and the damn drugs. It's the driving force psychology behind people that gets them into drugs or makes them take a gun and go and shoot people. Now, guns are around for a long time before people started going to schools and post offices and shooting people. It's a cultural thing, right? And it's got a lot to do with people's feeling of fulfillment and purpose in life and all those kind of things. And if you just like look at the actual data and the facts, it's not a real sexy headline that gets people attention because they're like, oh shit, we need to be responsible for our own outcomes and for that of our society. We can't just, give it to the government because as soon as you give it to the government and they do all these social programs, it turns to shit and all these things happen. Yet when you go out to the country, out to the bush, gun crime's nearly non-existent. Yet every damn bastard out there's got a gun, whether it be America or Australia, they've got guns everywhere, right? But they're not going into town and shooting people. It's a completely different culture.
Well, it's obviously it's everything to do with the government. The last thing they do is want to look at data that gives them a different outcome from their narrative, and that's in land management. Like they vilify farmers to the nth degree because they're the ones that kill on the reef. Uh, and that's all the message they want to get across. And it's quite interesting. Like I think Czechoslovakia is probably the most interesting case. You actually can get a license. One of the reasons you can get a firearms license is to protect yourself, and has one of
Yep.
the lowest. It has a high participation rate of gun owners and has amongst the lowest gun deaths. Because people familiar them so they don't accidentally top themselves, and people got a respect for each other as well. So
100%.
if you look at real data, you can get a
Not
completely
not
different
emotional data.
outcome. But just before we go, I'd just like to put up a slide, and we'll just go down the list of a couple of things.
Yep. Go for it.
Now, I've been talking to you when talking about getting a gun license, where there seems to be a reasonable amount of sites around where you can get a little bit of basic information. So you can
That's the
get
steps I
just
went
Google
through.
get a gun license, firearms license in Queensland, so you can come up. So this is huntingtrips.com.au, and
Hmm.
step one, your genuine reason needs to be sorted in the first instance. Do you have a genuine reason, and what you have to do to abide by that? So we've
Yep.
spoken on that, but one of the things that sort of interests me in regards to the character of a person who should and shouldn't own a firearms license. Like myself, I'm I'm not a very good person who looks after his tools, if you know what I mean. And I'm not a
Yep.
very tidy person. I'm a person who sort of, if I'm doing a job and I still think I'm going to do it tomorrow, I'll just leave the stuff there and then maybe come back to it in a few days. I don't think I've got a good enough self-discipline and organisation to be a good fire person with a firearm. unless I got into it properly and participated. So is that one of your things when a person comes in and um, thinks about getting a firearms license? Do you sort of see that sort of characters in people? Is that something you can sort of recognise that from
Yeah,
the
well, that all falls under the step five there, which is deliberation, which is the part between when I said you go to the post office with the ID check, and that's that 2 to 3 months process where the police look into you. In fact, it really only takes them, it takes 2 months for the paperwork to get on the desk, and then they just go check, 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 and have a look through your history and go yes or no. But um, look, I if anyone comes in and says I want to get a gun for self protection, I go, listen, you're doing that. You're going to cause problems for the industry. We're not about that. In fact, particularly going to get a handgun, even if you were going to lie about it, you'd have to be pretty convincing because you're going to be a long time before you get the gun. You've got to attend a lot of shoots and be actively interested in shooting. Um, the big thing, Bill, to be really blunt, is you need to be safe, right? Um, if people come into our range or any other range and they're not being safe, they're going to get run out of town. So to get a handgun, you need to be signed off by a club. So if you go to a club and you're not being safe, they're not going to sign you off, or they shouldn't sign you off, I should say. If they are, they got rocks in their heads because why do you want someone at your club that's not safe? I don't want anyone at my club that's not safe. It just doesn't make any sense. Now, when it comes to long arms, there's a little bit they're a little bit more obvious. Hence, a handgun's called a concealed weapon. And people do make mistakes. People might leave them around from time to time. I don't know what people do in their private life, but I'm very conscious of it. As a firearms dealer, I have a hell of a lot more to lose as well. If I get caught doing the wrong thing, it's not just lose my own personal license. I lose 8 licenses, and 7 people lose their jobs. So that's not, I have a lot more on the line to be responsible for. Now, in saying that, as you said, some people are meticulous and look after things, and other people don't care. The most important thing to understand is that when you go through the firearms training, it'll be made very clear to you, you can't leave guns laying around. You need to put them in storage. If you get out of your car, you've got guns in the car, you need to lock your car. You need to make sure they're in bags. You need to make sure they're not visible, all these kind of things. Now, if you get caught by a police officer and you're not doing these things, you're not going to get a slap on the wrist, particularly if you get a bit of a cop with on a shitty day. They're going to throw the book at you because you've been told, right? If you've got to that point, we've gone through the firearm safety course and done the application, and you've read through the application, and you signed off on a legal document that says you're well aware of the laws and implications of having a firearm license, and you do something stupid, like when people come in and they're putting the guns in storage because of stupid things they've done with the gun, and I'm like, well, you're an idiot. Like, don't do stupid things with your guns. Now, if for example they're going through a divorce and their ex-partners put a restraining order on them, um, like nearly 100% of those, I'd say 98% of the time, they get their guns back and have nothing to answer for because within the legal system, if the woman claims that they're being abused or whatever, the police want to put a restraining order on them to protect their own asses anyway, in case something happens, because they don't want to be liable for something that happens down the path. So that's just like this stupid little, thing that happened because some police officer, from what I understand, got held liable for not putting a restraining order on someone after there was a complaint made. So now it's just this blanket thing. But if you've got a restraining order put against you, you lose your guns. All right. Nearly every one of those guys has got the guns back. That is completely different to being a responsible firearm owner. So as long as people are doing the right thing, making sure their guns locked away and temporarily inoperable, so that someone can't walk past or a kid can't pick them up and start accidentally firing, because a lot of deaths from guns come from complacency like that.
Well, I think the most important thing is, um, do you believe the system as it is now, even though it's a bit rigorous than that, the public should have confidence in the process, and the people delivering the training and the information to ensure that the gun owners that are eventually uh, get to a situation where they get their permit to acquire and actually possess the firearm, that by the time they get there, um, they're going to be as well instructed and capable of doing and being a good firearms license. And if you if you if you believe the public should have the confidence, then it's reasonable to expect, well, the bureaucracy should also have the confidence that the system's working and not be
Yep.
always seen to want to white ant it further.
So how many people in Queensland in the last 30, 40, whatever, pick a time frame, have been shot in cold blood with a firearm that was legally owned and licensed by a person?
Probably none.
Like recently we had that cops that turned up at the property and they got shot. I believe those guys did have firearms license and guns. Um, but depending on who you talk to, there's a lot of weird stuff around that whole situation, and they probably shouldn't have been in the way they were anyway. I don't know. What I know is I don't know enough about that to really make any comment, other than that's one instance where people who had firearms licenses had done something like that. Now, for the most part, if it's drug gang related, they're illegally obtained guns that are smuggled in or, were supposed to be disposed of and weren't, all this kind of stuff. Um, but it's all on the black market. You just don't hear stories about people walking over to the neighbour's place and shooting him or going to do stupid things in Australia. And it's not because we don't have semi-automatics or we don't have automatics or we don't have all these kind of things. It's because generally our society's got people who are pretty well adjusted. And if you're not, you can't get access to guns unless you're doing it illegally. The proof's in the pudding. Like it's not, it's, you don't have to go arguing this real hard to see that our society's pretty good, right? People do cause more crimes with knives, but crimes of passion and drug crimes and all that kind of stuff, people do anyway. But people run over people with cars and all this kind of stuff. But it's not the dominant thing in our society. It might be the dominant thing in the news when it happens, but it's not really a big chunk of society. And sadly, people need to get their head around the fact that there's a certain percentage of society that are just nutcases, that whether they have a gun, a knife, or explosives, or a car, or a truck, they'll do something stupid, like when they go over the edge. That's just inevitable in any society. And I think access to guns doesn't change that at all for those people. You know what I mean? So I think right now, in Australia at large, the system's probably even still too tight in terms of it. I'd love to see state government lands be opened up in Queensland for people to hunt. We've got over 30 million feral pigs here that are huge problems. There's feral cats everywhere. And what was I reading last night? 1.5 billion Australian species are killed every year by cats in Australia. 1.5 billion. Do the math on that. If everyone had access, to go out to a property and shoot cats, one, it would be a hell of a lot of fun, and the other would get rid of the cat problem.
Yeah, we're doing something positive for the environment.
Yeah, 100%. And anyone who goes, oh, poor cats, 1.5 billion little frogs and marsupials that don't exist anywhere else in the world are getting wiped out by cats. And the same thing with turtles. People, oh, they shouldn't shoot other pigs. You know what pigs do to our environment? What they do to turtle nests and stuff like that? Get rid of them. Just shoot them.
So anyway, look, we've gone over the hour. Just
We
to,
have.
to
Sorry,
wrap
Alex.
up, how would you sort of put the message out there that people should, if they're thinking about becoming a firearms owner,
Yes.
and who they should approach and talk to in the first instance, and B, what's the benefits of being a firearms owner?
So if you want to do the course, so the first thing you need to do the course, but if you just want some general information, you're in the Cairns region, Cairns Firearm Safety Training with Phil Lawrence. Phil's awesome. super chilled guy. I think if you're going to be learning about guns, you need to be someone who's super calm and relaxed, doesn't stress you, so you feel good because there's already enough stress that goes on just holding a firearm the first time. So you need to be calm so you do good things with it. But Google firearms safety training in whatever area you are. Go in and see your local gun shop and have a chat to the staff in there. Um, don't don't chat to your mates too much because they'll give you mate information rather than the correct information, and you'll find people have different ideas based on when they got their license, and it might be true for that time frame. It doesn't exist now. So get the latest information. If you want to get into shooting, go to your local gun shop, have a look at the kind of guns they have, and what kind of shooting you want to get into, because it's kind of like cars. You get a Land Cruiser if you're going to go bush, but you don't take it to the track to race. You want to get the gun that suits the purpose that you're looking to achieve. So if you want to do long distance shooting and shoot 1,000 yards, that's a very different gun to shooting rats in the shed. So you need to figure out what the outcome is. Um, and then once you've done all that, you're it's just basically doing your course and you're going through. What was the last part of the question? Sorry, Bill.
In regards to the social benefits and
Oh, the
that from
benefit.
being firearms, in regards to for people who are not familiar with it and that, what's the sort of long-term benefits you can get in regards to relationships that develop out of it and camaraderie, I suppose?
Oh, 100%. It's a lot more fun. If you've never done it, it's a lot more fun than you think it's going to be. My mum loves it. My mother-in-law loves it. You can give her a shotgun or a pistol, and they shoot it. They get a big smile on their face, and um, I haven't seen anyone come in to give a shooting experience a go and not walk out with a huge smile. They're a hell of a lot of fun. So there's that aspect. It's fun. Secondly, mentally, like it's a real challenge because some days you can be on, and other days you're not, and it all comes down to being able to calm yourself down enough to be present and just take the shot. And you can't force a shot. You've got to just be ready to go, build the pressure on the trigger, and let it happen. But a lot of people try to force it, and the more frustrated you get, the worse it gets, and then it just kind of spirals out of control. And you need to be able to
Come
calm
back
yourself
another
down.
day.
Yeah, come back another day. But there's a lot of disciplines too, right? You can just shoot clay pigeons. That's amazing fun. You don't have to go hunt. If you don't want to hunt stuff, I get it. Some people don't want to kill animals, even if they're feral animal, or they don't want to hunt to eat food. There's different kind of levels of skill sets that are required and different interests that exist within shooting. You can do target shooting. You can do paper targets. You can do silhouette targets and metal targets. You can do multi-distance events. There's so much stuff. Like there's a huge variety. But I think the one big thing that I love about it, I mentioned earlier, is it has no level of discrimination. If you want an equal playing field, like shooting's it. Like it really doesn't shooting the gun doesn't care whether you're tall or short or fat or skinny or male or female or old or young. It doesn't care, right? You just need to hold that gun and shoot. Now, you could say, oh, a big, strong person's going to have, a better chance of holding the gun. Well, there's bench press shooting and there's prone shooting where you lay down, and it's got nothing to do with it. It's about how calm you can stay and build the pressure on that trigger and read the conditions of the day. Like I said, it doesn't matter if you're male or female or young or old. It's just practice, time in the seat, getting used to it. And that to me, mate, is huge because everyone goes on about all this equality rubbish, which I don't believe anyone's equal. I don't give a shit. But no one's equal. We're all different, right? And that's what I love about humans. If we're all the bloody same, it'd be boring as hell. But shooting is level. Like everyone has to do the same amount of work regardless, right? Unless you can't see. I get that, right? If you can't see, a problem. But there's guys that have got one arm, you know, people in wheelchairs, all sorts of stuff. It doesn't affect their ability to perform. They just have to set up differently. So yeah, I love all that stuff about it, mate. And socially, it's a lot of fun. You can bond, you can hunt, you can hike, you can go to New Zealand and chase deer, or head to Tasmania. There's all this different kind of stuff you can do, and it's get you out of the damn house and doing something.
Well, that's a good start these days, I think. Just get people out and talking to each other and doing things together. But
Yep.
it sounds to me like the first port of call should be a local gun shop, have a general discussion.
Yep.
Of course, you've got to be aware that people are at a workplace trying to earn a living as well. So sometimes you have to pick your time or come back and have a chat when it's
So mentioning
a
that, Bill,
lull
because
period.
yeah, it's if you got 20 people in the shop and things are jam packed, and some guy just wants to pick your brain about things, we're always happy to have a chat, our store and other stores. But it's one of those things where you're like, mate, we're jammed at the moment. Um, but by all means, I think the first step's always just to make that connection and chat to the staff there, and then our staff are awesome, man. Like I love my guys. They're really, really good. If you come in enthusiastic and passionate about a form of shooting they're into, they're going to invite you out to shoot. You know what I mean? They're going to say, "Hey, we're going to be at the range on this day. Bring your kit. We'll help you get set up. We'll have a fun day at it, and away you go." Right? Because they want more people like them doing the sport they love. And by the way, FNQ just went to the nationals and won. So far North Queensland guys, if you're anyone from up here and you're into shooting, particularly long distance shooting, we've produced world champions. There's multiple national champions from up here. And our far North Queensland team just scooped the prize pool at the nationals. So there's a lot of talent up here for long distance shooting. And then PK, as one example, every time he goes to the nationals to shoot pistols, he wins a bunch of events. He's represented Australia internationally. He's an absolute wizard. But there's lots of guys here that are sponsored IPSC pistol shooters. There's all sorts of talent up here, and that exists all over this country. There's a lot of people who are really, really good at this, but sadly, it's not something that people want to stand up proudly about publicly because of this stupid perception that comes out of America that really has nothing to do, even with what goes on over there, but absolutely nothing to do with culture in Australia, and gun violence in Australia is almost non-existent.
Okay, Dan, look, thanks very much for your time tonight. I've really
Been a
enjoyed the
pleasure, Bill.
conversation. I hope you enjoyed the experience. And we will come back sometime in the new year and talk about recycling, um, because I've got a few opinions on recycling. But yes, thanks again for your time. If you can just stay on the line, I'll introduce next week's show as well. So thanks again,
Sounds good.
Dan. Really appreciate your
Thanks,
time.
guys.
If
Well
you
done.
enjoyed tonight's shows, please like, share, and subscribe to our Facebook page and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Next week, I'll find a guest, have a talk about renewables and the slowly shifting sands in regards to people realising the flaws in the system. We have had a number of people from different organisations now speak up, and it's becoming more commonplace for experts now to go against the narrative that renewables are going to be the cheapest form of energy for us in the future. So join us again next week. Thank you.